Hello horror fans! Welcome to another edition of Silver Screams. My name is Megan Salinas, and tonight I am going to be talking to you about Scream Queens Season 1, Episode 6, Beware of Young Girls. Now, I'm going to keep this relatively short because, as you can see, my partner in crime is not with me. Katie Kellen is out sick, so I'm going to be talking to you guys about this episode real quick to just go over how interesting it is. I want to preface this by saying I'm just actually coming off of watching Halloween H2O. I was on a big Michael Myers kick this year. So I watched a lot of Halloween movies because of Halloween Horror Nights, and I had seen most of H2O in the past, just on TV. I'd never sat down to watch the whole thing, so I finally sat down to watch the whole thing yesterday. And in that movie, Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, was the head of a school 20 years after the events of Halloween. So immediately going from that to watching her play Dean Munch is just bizarre, because she goes from being a well-meaning, high-functioning alcoholic who means well but is ultimately still very paranoid about the events from 20 years ago, to a high-functioning alcoholic who's the head of a school who's still very much affected by the events of 20 years ago, but is also evil. So it's very, very bizarre watching that movie and this episode back to back, considering, you know, we have somebody who goes from being a victim slash heroine to being a murderer, a cold-blooded murderer. So that's messed up and also really awesome. I'll be honest, I didn't expect Dean Munch to have committed the murder at the end of this. That was really, really cool and very clever. Super messed up, but I mean, that is the show. So, in a nutshell, as a sidebar, and this has nothing to do with Scream Queens, this has everything to do with Halloween H2O. Halloween H2O is how the franchise should have ended. Like, for those of you who haven't seen it, sit down, give it a watch. The true franchise, I suppose, Halloween 1, Halloween 2, Halloween H2O. You don't need necessarily anything else. Like I said before, 5 has my favorite moment from the franchise, but like in terms of the trilogy of 1, 2, and Halloween H2O, and ignoring Resurrection and the reboots, compared with the trilogy of 4, 5, and 6, I'll take 1, 2, and H2O, and it pains me to say it because, like I said, I really like Jamie, and I like what I like that one scene in 5, and I liked what they tried to do, quote unquote, but let's face it, 1, 2, and H2O, or let's just call that the Halloween trilogy and just forget everything else in the franchise, if that's cool, especially Resurrection. What a dumb movie. Anywho, absolutely nothing to do with Scream Queens. That is just a side note editorial for another day. Anyway, so to kind of get back to this episode, in addition to this murder mystery plot, which Gigi led Grace and Pete down, I don't think she necessarily meant to provide this setup for Feathers to get framed for murder, but at the same time, I genuinely think she was just trying to lead the kids towards more evidence of Dean Munch's guilt, and that I feel like on her part, she wasn't planning on anyone getting killed as a result of it, but like, she's a murderer hell-bent on revenge, as she says in the opening. And she's not really concerned about collateral damage, as it seems. And this conversation that she has on the phone totally cements my theory that it is the 2 frat boys, Boone included, that are wearing the Red Devil costumes, and that that Gigi's the one giving them orders. So my theory is that it's the 3 of them, and that's why one Red Devil is very reluctant to kill the other one, because it's hard for him, and that makes me think that, okay, these are fraternity brothers. That makes complete and total sense. If I turn out to be wrong, which I am on a roll this week for being wrong about television theories. So I will totally accept it if I am wrong, but that's where my mind is at right now. Anywho, the other kind of side plot is what's going on with the Chanels, because what we thought was going to result in one of the Chanels getting killed actually was the opening of this episode with Chanel number 2's funeral. So that didn't necessarily amount to what we thought it was going to be, and it took an entire episode before the girls finally come to the conclusion that they need to kill Chanel number 1 after a Ouija board communication with Chanel number 2 basically tells her that tells them that Chanel number 1 is the killer and that Chad is cheating on her and all that other stuff. I will say I'm not entirely convinced that Hester wasn't the one moving the board around. That way it told them things that would suit her needs. That would not surprise me in the least bit. On the other hand, it's hard to tell whether or not this fever dream that Chanel number 1 had actually was the spirit of Chanel number 2, or if it was just that, just a fever dream, and that it was some manifestation of her subconscious. There are two schools of thought on this. One is that it's just a dream, again, manifestation of her subconscious, and her suspicion that her fellow sorority sisters are trying to kill her, which, I mean, let's face it, I'm sure she thinks that they're about to do that every day anyway. Especially with how she treats them and the fact that they, you know, ratted her out and sent her to prison and everything like that. But then there's also the idea that this actually was genuinely the spirit of Chanel number 2, because right now it's kind of hard at this point to tell whether or not that's actually possible in this show, given the world that we have. If it is the spirit of Chanel number 2, it's friggin' hilarious and also sad. Hell has no dinosaurs. That is a major bummer. So I like the idea of all of the Chanels banding together and actually looking at Grace and Zayday with suspicion, because Chanel number 1 is right. Technically, none of the murders started until they started pledging, and even though Candle Girl and Zayday weren't in this episode, they are very, very few of the initial rushes that are left. Of the initial rushes, it's just Hester, Grace, Zayday, and then Candle Girl, whose name I forget. Everybody else is dead. So they don't have any means to suspect Candle Girl, again, because she wasn't really in this episode. But Zayday and Grace are very much a team, and given that there are 2 Red Devils, it makes sense from Chanel's perspective. So, you know, props to them to actually, like, thinking for 2 seconds and kind of being able to put that together. That, of course, is not the case. But it's interesting to kind of think that, and it's interesting to think about where the 2 of them will, or the 4 of them will go with that being a possibility. That was a flying cat. Anywho, so that, and we had this really great shot at the end of the episode panning up from Grace and Zayday walking into the house up to the shadows of the 4 Chanels who have now banded together, which I thought was really cool. Undermines the point of Chanel and Zayday coming together in the last episode, but still a really cool shot. And again, I'm enjoying the hell out of this show, so I don't mind too much. But it is a little bit of a bummer that we go from, like, bonding to immediately backstabbing again. But again, more introspection for Chanel, and again, just something to kind of cement that she's not actually one of our killers. That being said, I want to say Pete was like, the only other thing I want to point out about this episode is that I felt like Pete was channeling Matthew McConaughey. Like, and at one point he actually did say, all right, all right, all right. What was that about? That was weird. Anywho, this episode was just a ton of fun. And looking at the promo for next week, it looks like it's going to be mostly about the Chanels trying to prove that Zayday and Grace are the killers. And meanwhile, it looks like the Red Devil killer actually does go after Dean Munch, Psycho style. Why they've waited this long? I guess just because it's clear at this point that they can't frame Dean Munch anymore for the murders. I guess the idea, now that Feathers has been taken away into what looks like a Hannibal Lecter style cell. Like, it's not even padded walls, it is a clear cell that they've thrown her into with a straitjacket, which, I mean, you commit one murder, is that, I guess they're trying to pin all the other ones on her too, but even though they can't directly do that, still, it's really weird to have committed one murder and to get thrown into that cell. Oh, I do actually need to bring up one other thing, as while investigating, Grace and Pete went to the mental institution at the behest of Dean Munch, and first of all, the drawings of her being a dress designer were just hilarious. It looks like what I would try to draw if I were designing dresses. But there was a kind of off, and I don't know if this is a reference, I'll be completely honest. If you happen to know, comment below. Let me know what you guys think. But there was this mental patient who felt the need to paint everybody who came into the asylum. And Katie pointed this out, and again, I'm sorry she's not here, but she pointed it out while we were watching it, is that in the background there was a painting of Gigi. So that's, again, interesting to think about. It makes me think that she was at the mental institution for some time after what happened. And it sounds like we're finally going to get an answer as to what happened to the baby next week, and I'm thinking, I don't necessarily want to kind of go this way, but I'm thinking it is Grace, because it sounds like that's the proof that the Chanels are looking for to officially pin it on her and Zayday. So that's that, and I don't know if the Dean Munch will make it out of next week's episode alive. I hope so, because Jamie Lee Curtis is just a joy to watch on this show. I kind of want to just rewatch H2O again, because it's such a contrast, having her play Laurie and having her play Dean Munch. It is a hoot. Anywho, that's it for my thoughts this week. I want to know what you guys thought about this episode of Scream Queens, so comment below, let me know what you think. And as always, if you guys have any thoughts on what we should be covering on Silver Screams in terms of vlogs, in terms of movie reviews, or even television reviews, be sure to let me know in the comments below. You can follow Silver Screams on Instagram and Twitter at silver_screams. It's also on Facebook. You can follow Katie on Twitter at Kiaxet, that's Kiaxet. And you can follow me on Twitter at TheMenguin, that's TheMenguin. And on Instagram as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.